It's College Basketball Recruiting Weekly. We're back, and we've got a jam-packed show as we are in the heart of March Madness. And the madness doesn't just mean the NCAA Tournament. We are, of course, going to talk about the NCAA Tournament, the aftermath of some of the teams who got knocked out in Week 1, falling to some Cinderellas. Then we're going to break down the top prospects and what we saw from them. And, of course, the coaching carousel, it's spinning. The transfer portal, it's rolling. We also had some high school commitments and some reclassifications this week. We're going to cover it all right here, College Basketball Recruiting Weekly. The aftermath of March Madness. Everybody loves a Cinderella except for the team they beat, and most especially their fan bases. And there are some angry fan bases after Week 1 of the NCAA Tournament. We're going to talk about a couple of them. I'm going to bring in Travis Branham and Isaac Trotter, my 24/7 Sports colleagues. Guys, we're going to talk first about Kentucky. Trav, I know that's your home state. John Calipari asked if he understands the frustrations of the fan base after the game, said he had empathy for them. What can Kentucky fans realistically expect to be on the horizon here for their team?
Yeah, they very well known, have the #1 class coming in to Lexington next season. That is headlined by 3 top 5 prospects, and DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, and Aaron Bradshaw, also coupled alongside Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepard. And I will be first and quick to say, be very careful taking in what anyone says regarding this team, especially in hyping them up, if they have not stepped foot in a high school basketball gym in the last 3 to 4 years. This team, while when you look on paper, it is spectacular, not all classes are created equal. DJ Wagner is a premier name, and he has gotten better over the last 12 months, but he still has a ways to go. And the question marks on how these pieces fit together remain to be seen. There's going to be a lot of work to be done. And if I'm looking at historical Kentucky basketball teams, this team frankly compares to me of the 2013-2014 team. If you remember, they were also the #1 class coming in. It featured Julius Randle, the Harrison twins, James Young, and others. But they struggled mightily at times throughout the regular season. They did find their rhythm late, and they did make a deep run to the national championship where they lost to UConn. I envision something similar possibly being the case in Lexington next season.
Okay, so here's my question for that, because obviously things have changed since that 2013 season. How many, if any, major contributors do you expect to come back? And secondly, how active do we expect Kentucky to be in the transfer portal this spring?
That's a very difficult question to answer at this moment. Obviously, emotions are still high here in Lexington. That's always the case anytime a team comes off a hard loss. So the 48 hours, you know how this goes. The decisions, the things that are being said don't always live up. But does Oscar Tshiebwe come back? I don't anticipate that being the case. The biggest question is going to be around Jacob Toppin and Antonio Reeves. Both guys can come back and play next season, but do they want to? That's going to be a question that we're going to be closely monitoring. Cason Wallace, you can anticipate going to the NBA draft, and we don't know when that announcement will be coming, but I think it's a safe bet that he will end up there. So this is going to be a freshman-dominant team like we've seen in past. It won't be like these recent Kentucky teams, which has been very transfer-dominant. Now they will be going and being active in this transfer portal, but this team will not be built around transfers. This team is going to be looking like those former Kentucky teams, those John Calipari teams, in which this is entirely built around freshmen.
It's going to be interesting in this day and age of college basketball. It's really hard to win if you don't have some experience there. Isaac, I will go to you on this one. Purdue suffered a disappointing loss. Obviously, Matt Painter's approach to roster construction vastly different from John Calipari. What did you see from Purdue this week, and do you have any pick-me-ups for the Purdue fan base that is not very happy right now?
Yeah, there's no question this is a failure. I mean, when you go into this season expecting to compete and you maybe outlive expectations and start playing at a higher level and get a #1 seed, you expect to make a run. And Purdue talked a lot about that St. Peter's loss last year, how that motivated them, how they were going to be better from it. Get to a year later, and the same story is happening yet again. And it's tough because I felt like Purdue was one impact guard away from these problems kind of disappearing. They missed on Tyrese Hunter, even though they gave that a really good run, and Matt Painter had thought that they had a chance to really land him. They missed on Nigel Pack, and both of those guys are in the Sweet 16 for their respective teams, and Purdue sitting at home after suffering one of the biggest, most shocking upsets in NCAA tournament history. So I feel like the season can kind of be summed up by these freshman guards, and Braden Smith was not good enough in the first round against Fairleigh Dickinson, and now we have the same question remaining moving forward. Like, can Purdue win with young guards? They couldn't this year. I think they need to make some moves in the transfer portal to upgrade the talent around this roster, and even if they get Zach Edey back, there needs to be changes so that teams can't just throw two guys on Zach Edey and you don't make them pay with a 5 for 28 performance from three-point range.
That, to me, really is the common denominator between these two teams. What happens with their big man? Does Oscar Tshiebwe come back? Does Zach Edey come back? Obviously, Purdue needs to upgrade in the backcourt, but I think organically that's going to happen with some of those young guards with experience. But without Zach Edey, they are a totally different team. You can check out the paths for both Kentucky and Purdue on your screen now. For much more, visit 247sports.com. Now, another team that didn't have things go quite as they hoped in week one of the tournament is Duke. Obviously, coming off that ACC championship, they appeared to be really playing their best basketball this season heading into the NCAA tournament. But then Mark Mitchell goes down with a little bit of an unexpected knee injury. He misses the Tennessee game, and Tennessee moves on to the Sweet 16 while Duke heads home. Now, almost immediately after the game, the questions immediately went to that star freshman class. What are they going to do? Who's going? Who's staying? Trav, I will start with you. Who do you think, if anyone, is coming back next year?
I actually anticipate us seeing quite a few returners from this Duke team. And I think next year's Duke roster at this moment is actually extremely promising. As of right now, the anticipated departures are likely going to be Derek Lively, who's played himself into a first-round pick, especially with his development over the last month. Dariq Whitehead, a former top 5 recruit in the 2022 class, who really became a terrific three-point shooter this season. And then I don't necessarily anticipate Jeremy Roach making a return for his senior season. I think his days, he may have ran his course at Duke, and I think that's just the days we live in now, where kids just get a little tired of college basketball, and they're ready for some new changes. So the biggest question mark at this moment, I think, is going to be Kyle Filipowski. He's obviously projected as a first-round pick, but there's a lot of rumblings that he actually wants to stay in Durham and play for a sophomore season. So that is the biggest question mark heading into this spring for what Duke's roster will be next season. Yeah,
I couldn't agree with that more. If Flip comes back, obviously that's huge for Duke. But the guy I want to talk about is Tyrese Proctor. Tyrese Proctor was initially part of the 2023 recruiting class. He ended up joining a year earlier than planned. It happened just days after Trevor Keele stayed in the 2022 draft. And Trav, you know this. It's this time of year where we've got final rankings on the brain, and every day I'm like, Isaiah Collier, Justin Edwards, Ron Holland, what do I want to do? And I'm sitting there thinking yesterday, and I'm watching Tyrese Proctor, and I said, he's better than all these dudes. So, if Tyrese Proctor were in the class of 2023, I think he'd be the #1 guard and maybe even the #1 prospect. Now, I know people have treated it like a foregone conclusion. Or let me say this, draft media has treated it like a foregone conclusion that he will come back to Duke next year. I actually think there's more NBA interest in him from the teams and scouts themselves than is potentially being reported. I think NBA teams are probably going to back channel and say, hey, we'll consider you in the first round, but we'll give you a guaranteed deal if you go in the second. That happens more often than I think people realize. But if he comes back, I believe he has a chance to be a lottery pick in the 2024 NBA draft. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And on the status of whether he will return next year or not, I do think it is a bit open-ended. I should have added him into that first batch of guys that we discussed. I do think it's a bit of a question. If I'm a betting man, I actually am on the betting side that he will return next season. But again, as you're saying, there's definitely more interest than I think people are playing up with the NBA side of things in terms of teams just actually interested. They really liked what they saw this season, especially in the growth of his game as a playmaker when they switched him onto the ball. He's a premier talent, but if he does come back this year, I think you're looking at a 20 to 30 pick. But next year, if he comes back, especially when we know this class coming up, we're talking potentially a top 10, top 5 player, especially if he develops that jump shot even more. He was learning how to manipulate defenses as the season went on. I think that could take a massive jump next year and could play himself into making a lot of money.
Yeah, some of that's going to happen organically. He builds up his body. They get some better shooting around him, so he gets better spacing. He can manipulate pick and roll better. I think all of that makes a lot of sense. All right, Trotter, I'm going to you now because the player who was the top-ranked high school prospect coming out of last year's class, Nick Smith, we've seen the saga this year with his knee. He's out of the lineup. He's gone for 2 months. He comes back. He's putting up big numbers, albeit in high volume, sometimes inefficient style. Arkansas wasn't really winning games when that was happening. In fact, they lost 4 or 5 heading into the NCAA tournament. We saw him take less shots than he has since his return in the first game of the NCAA tournament. In the second game, Eric Musselman opts to put him on the bench, brings in the veterans, and I would argue it was that move that propelled them into the Sweet 16. What happened post-game, and what is the story around Nick Smith right now?
Yeah, I think Nick Smith, during the game, when you watched his body language on the sideline, it was really encouraging. Arkansas is making this huge comeback. Kansas is really having a hard time handling Arkansas's pressure. And Nick Smith is the one standing on the sideline, cheering his guys, first one off the bench for huddles and timeouts. And that's really encouraging. But after the game, there were conversations in the locker room where Nick Smith Jr. broke down a little bit and had a hard time realizing that Arkansas just won a game. And I didn't really have a big part of that. Like, I didn't help this team that much. I actually hurt them when I was out on the floor. So I think it's one of those growth processes. And we saw it against Illinois and we saw it against Kansas, where Arkansas played their best basketball with Nick Smith Jr. on the bench. I don't know if that's necessarily the case moving forward. They have a UConn matchup that's going to be an insane showdown in the Sweet 16. I think they need him to go after that drop coverage that UConn's going to play. They need a good Nick Smith Jr. So I liked his body language, but he needs to step up on the floor when he's out there, because Arkansas really absolutely has to have him if they want to make a run toward the Final Four.
And you know what? I was remiss in saying it wasn't just the inefficient offense. There were some significant lapses on the defensive end as well. And the other thing I'd like to point out, and I wrote this, is that it is possible for that show of emotion to come from both a sincere joy in the fact that his home state team is going to the Sweet 16 and simultaneously disappointment that he wasn't able to contribute to it more. Those things can coexist. And I think, you know, there's some narratives out there that are trying to kind of make him the villain for being selfish. I don't think that's what we saw at all. But, you know, that story is certainly not over yet. All right, Trav, I want to talk about Nick Smith's EYBL teammate from a summer and a half ago, and that is Brandon Miller, who's been the best freshman in all of college basketball this season. Now, he had a rough go of it as well in the NCAA tournament. He tried to play through a groin injury. He did not score in the opening round game. Then he came back and had 19 in the second round. So what did you see from Brandon Miller this week, and do you think it has any bearing long-term on how NBA teams think about him?
Absolutely not. I think we come to this every single March where there's massive overreactions one way or the other when these kids come into this type of tournament play. Obviously, pressure's really high. The stage is extremely big, and we have seen kids turn it on in March and see themselves go from maybe a late first rounder up into top 10 range. And I think a lot of those have been overreactions where we see those kids not necessarily pan out long term. And so in this instance, Brandon's been the opposite, looking like a top 3, top 5 pick guaranteed come June. Obviously, it's not been going too great, scoring, as you said, 0 points. But I did like the way he impacted the game defensively. His spirit, as we're sitting here talking about Nick Smith and his reaction to that game the other day. Brandon Miller's reaction, he was having a lot of fun on the bench with his teammates. It clearly didn't bother him one bit that he went out there and scored 0 points, but he still had some highlight reel defensive plays. So at this moment, zero concern. He has done more than enough all season long to prove himself as a top 5 pick this coming June.
I actually think there's a way in which you can be impressed at what he did this week. I don't know that he plays in a normal – if it's not the NCAA tournament – he was hurt. You know, a groin he was really limited by that groin injury. And if it was a regular season game, I don't think he plays. So I think you've got to give him some credit for trying to fight through it. And then I think in the second game, you've got to give him credit for adapting and figuring out a way to make plays and get things done on both ends of the floor, to your point, despite the injury. All right, now last but not least, when Kevin Durant compares you to an NBA All-Star, you've got to pay attention. So Kevin Durant tweeting that Dylan Disu looks like LaMarcus Aldridge out there. So, Isaac, I'm going to ask you because I don't want to address it and disagree with Kevin Durant. What did you think of that comp?
I mean, it was a little aggressive, right? Like, maybe we shouldn't go that far, but I think Dylan Disu has a really bright future for Texas in the here and now. And it's a Texas team with Final Four upside. They think they can win the national championship. And Dylan Disu has added a completely different dimension to this team. You know, when you watch Texas, it can get a lot of ISO heavy with their 3 guards. Serge Ibaka-Rice has been fantastic this year, but adding in those Dylan Disu post-ups have been really, really impressive. But Kevin Durant, super locked in on college basketball. I'm always appreciative of Kevin Durant Twitter comments. I think he's one of the most intriguing players in the country. I love how open he is. So the more the merrier from KD moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I don't think he was really comparing him to LaMarcus Aldridge. And I will say this, Dylan Disu averaged 15 and 9 as a sophomore at Vanderbilt. Hadn't seen anything anywhere close to that in his nearly 2 years at Texas until this postseason where he's averaging 18 and 9. So a player to keep an eye on. Again, for much more on the teams and players still alive in March Madness, be sure to visit 247sports.com. Well, as we talk about roster construction, we of course have to talk about the transfer portal. It is now rolling along, and we saw a number of very good players go into the portal last week. We're going to break them down, going to bring back in Travis Branham and Isaac Trotter to help me do that. So, Isaac, I'm going to start with you. Kowacie Reeves from Florida came on the board last week, and he is a prospect that is expected to get a lot of attention.
Yeah, top 50 recruit in the class of 2021, and we're talking about one of the guys when he just pops off the tape. He has extremely good athleticism, great bounce, can finish above the rim. He projects to be a multi-positional defender, but at Florida it's been kind of up and down the last few days, and Travis reported that Boston College has set up an in-home visit with him. I would expect in the coming days visits to be set up for Reeves, and he's got a ton of interest. And for him, I think the one big thing is finding a point guard that he can play with. And Virginia Tech is one of the latest schools that he has reached out. I'm interested by that one because Sean Padula is a guy that makes everybody else better that he plays with. I think Reeves needs something like that a little bit. So his shot selection was a little iffy at Florida at times, but the talent is absolutely there. I think he has a chance to be a superstar in the right scheme.
All right, now speaking of point guards that make everyone else better, Trav, I think you have someone that you'd like to mention having recently gone into the portal.
Yeah, that is Cal Baptist Terran Armstrong. He's an international point guard, actually came out of the NBA Global Academy just like Tyrese Proctor, who we have talked much about already on this broadcast. But 6'5", extremely intelligent point guard. He can impact the game both as a scorer, but primarily as a playmaker. He sees the floor extremely well. He makes good decisions with basketball. He's fast. He's got some shiftiness with the basketball. So when you look across the entire transfer portal, this is actually a guy who's in contention for the #1 current transfer out there. So he is right now in contention with J.J. Starling, who's already off the board of Syracuse. So Armstrong is going to have a tremendous amount of interest out of the college landscape. And one school that I will be keeping a close eye on is Arizona, that has deep international ties and obviously will be potentially looking to replace a guy like Kirk Risa, another international point guard who can really make shots out on the perimeter for him.
That would definitely be a very intriguing fit. One name that I will throw in there as well is Minnesota transfer Jamison Battle. He's going to be a grad transfer. He started at George Washington, played 2 seasons under Jamie Christian, and then 2 seasons at Minnesota. His junior year, averaged 17.5 per game. Big lefty wing, shot the ball well, saw his fitness go to a different level. His senior year, expected to take another step forward. In fact, I had him listed on the draftables to start the season, but the senior campaign began with an injury, and I think that really just derailed his progress. Ended up seeing his scoring totals drop to about 12.5 points per game. His shooting totals went down. His rebounding went down. This, to me, is a player who, for whatever the reason, put him in a different situation. You get his body right. You get his fitness right. We're talking about a 6'7" lefty wing who can stretch the floor, play multiple positions. I think that's a really intriguing fit for a number of high major programs, so that's someone I am focused on as well. As always, Travis in particular, our czar of the portal, will have you covered on 247sports.com. Make sure to visit us there all day and every day. the final NCAA tournament game wrapped up around midnight on Sunday, and it wasn't even 12 hours later. We had some massive news on the coaching carousel, particularly in the Big East, where Ed Cooley made the move from Providence to Georgetown, and then Rick Pitino, he's staying in New York, going from Iona to St. John's, really changing the entire landscape of the Big East Conference. Now, Travis, I will go to you to start. Rick Pitino to St. John's. This has got to be a good thing for the Johnnies.
It's an absolutely incredible thing for the Johnnies. They were on the brink of complete irrelevancy, but here they are getting one of the best coaches to ever do it in Rick Pitino, and a guy who fits the culture, and he is going to be able to build a team to compete not only for the Big East, but also for deep March runs, I think, very quickly. He's going to be able to recruit not only the Northeast, but the entire country, just like he has always done, and get those hard-nosed, tough, competitive guys. And I do believe that we will see them making some serious noise in the Big East and beyond.
All right, now I said last week on this show that I did not expect Ed Cooley to go to Georgetown. Reason being, Ed Cooley's from Providence. He's beloved, typically, in his local city, and rightfully so. He's brought Providence to 7 of the last 9 NCAA tournaments. Prior to his arrival, they went to 1 in 10 years. But here's the reality of it. Ed Cooley was almost, I don't want to say taken for granted, but I don't know that he got full appreciation for what he was able to pull off there at Providence, a place that doesn't have necessarily the same resources as other schools in the conference. Nevertheless, I am surprised that Georgetown was able to get him away. They obviously made an incredible offer and convinced him that what they had to offer, beyond just salaries and years and contracts and things like that, would allow him to take his program to another level. So I think this is a terrific hire for Georgetown. And as I said last week, this is a bad spot for Providence now. We're seeing that they're trying to move very quickly. There's a number of talented coaches they could turn to, but the Friars, in a suddenly very, very good Big East, have got to make the right hire here. This is a critical moment in their program. Isaac, one of the biggest names still on the market and potentially the next domino to fall is that of Penn State head coach Micah Shrewsberry. What are you hearing on where he might be at in his process?
Yeah, it's been a really complicated coaching carousel with Micah Shrewsberry. I think there was a lot of interest between Georgetown and Shrewsberry. Obviously, that's changed with Ed Cooley coming into the picture. And then there's this Notre Dame job, and it's still wide open. And Shrewsberry is a Midwest guy. On paper, going back to Notre Dame would make a ton of sense. But from what I've been told, it just doesn't feel like there's been that much of a connection between Notre Dame and Shrewsberry as of now. And then last week, we saw that Penn State was positioning itself to potentially give Shrewsberry a long extension. So I feel like the ball is in Shrewsberry's court. We're talking about one of the best X's and O's coaches in college basketball this year. His ability to make Penn State basketball relevant this year is really, really impressive. He's done it by finding mid-major transfers and putting them in a great system. He plays small in the Big Ten where you need to play big. So he's not afraid to think outside the box. And I think Penn State has shown that they really want to make sure to keep him around. But it's really up to him, and I wouldn't be surprised if something else happens. It feels like where he's trending changes every week.
Now, I will say this, and this isn't in regard to any specific coach. I want to preface what I'm about to say with that. But I think the thing that most fans don't recognize is that the landscape of college basketball has changed, and it's changed not just in terms of how you build rosters, but how coaches assess potential opportunities. It used to be that salaries and guaranteed years and facilities and chartered flights were the things that were most important in luring coaches to your destination. Those things are still important, but it's a bare minimum. Those are the things you need just to get in the door. On top of that, if you don't have a collective, the perception is you don't have a chance to win nationally at a consistent level. That is the name of the game right now. So for all of these fan bases that don't have a realistic understanding of where their job is in the grand scheme of things, I would encourage you to do this. Check out and research the power of your collective and see what some of these players are electing to do. Now, it's really hard these days because the NCAA has adopted this new policy where you're going to be guilty until proven innocent. So we as the media can't say player A chose school B because of NIL, because that could theoretically implicate them in the eyes of the NCAA. But what I'm telling you is almost every one of these coaching decisions has in large part NIL and the collective as a major consideration for the coaches in their future. All right, for much more on the carousel, make sure to visit 247sports.com. Isaac, Travis, and the whole crew will keep you updated from start to finish. All right, now if you've been following us here on College Basketball Recruiting Weekly and the 247 Sports channel, you know that we've been warning you for months that there were going to be a lot of prospects going from the class of 2024 to the class of 2023. Well, that has begun this week as Trenton Flowers committed to Louisville live on our air and subsequently announced the move. Kansas as well has a commitment that they flipped to the class of 2023. So, guys, I'm going to bring it back into you. Trav, you broke this announcement, announced live for the commitment to Louisville, obviously a big one in the total rebuild here for the Cardinals. But what can we expect with this most recent commitment?
Yeah, and first and foremost, he brings tremendous size, length, and athleticism. When you're talking from natural physical tools, Trenton Flowers is among the most talented in either 2024 and 2023. Talking about a kid he's also filled out, I should say, quite a bit over the last 12 months. His frame's really maturing. He can put his head on the rim, and he's done a great job of buying into his role as an active, versatile forward who can impact the game as a rebounder, as a cutter, a rim runner, a guy who can push the ball in transition. He can make a shot both off the catch and pull. That is also an area that he will need to continue improving, but he can also be a highly versatile defender. So Swiss Army knife, if you will. So Louisville, obviously in the midst or in the beginning stages of this complete rebuild, and he is their third addition for that team already this spring.
All right, now another team getting a late addition is Kansas. They got Marcus Adams from the West Coast, a really just late bloomer who's developed some serious momentum here over his final season. There was some ambiguity about whether he was going to stay in 23 or go back to 24. He is indeed going to join Kansas right away. He's a guy that potentially could play a couple different positions, be a threat at the 3 or the 4, the versatility. And I think anytime you get someone who is just improving at a rapid rate and has those elite physical tools, you buy into that upside and just the path that they are following. So, Isaac, I'm going to ask you, as we start to look ahead towards Kansas's roster, I know they had a disappointing loss this season, but they had a disappointing loss this weekend, but they had a terrific season, and they really rebuilt that roster just on a flip in a couple of months. So what can we expect from the Jayhawks next season?
Yeah, I would expect more of the same for Bill Self. I think that this is a roster that's going to look a lot different next year, just like it did the previous year. And I would expect Grady Dick to obviously be a lottery pick or in that conversation. Jalen Wilson probably in that late first, early second conversation. Kevin McCullough is a big one to watch too. Does he stay or does he go? That could impact some things. MJ Rice, a lot of conversations about his future with Kansas. So there's a lot of moving pieces for Kansas on the wing right now. I expect them to be a major player in the transfer portal, and they're obviously adding more size on the wing and more multi-positional wings to the mix with the addition of Adams. So Bill Self will have a very interesting sell in the portal if Kevin McCullough leaves. If McCullough returns, I think that could change certain things with who they attack, and if they could get DeJuan Harris back, that makes life easier for everybody else around him.
Yeah, I think I could score in double figures with DeJuan Harris passing to me. Isaac, Travis, thank you very much for joining us. We will see you guys again next week. Well, that's it for another episode of College Basketball Recruiting Weekly, and if you hadn't noticed, things are happening really fast. So make sure you are visiting us, 247sports.com, following us on social media. We've got you covered. Coaching carousel, transfer portal, high school recruiting, NBA draft, NCAA tournament, everything under one roof. 247sports.com. We'll see you next week.